I consider it a sign of respect if, within the bounds of reason, you're able to make a trip, especially a trip where somebody is going to be talking about or showing off a project they worked an enormous amount of time on, and you make the effort to show up for the big day. Such it was that I drove for a couple hours and was at the first book reading and signing of Space Rogue's book about the history of the Loft Collective. He recognized me from the back. But more importantly than showing up for my friend is the fact that the book itself, which I devoured the next day, is something I've been hoping for quite some time. And I think it's worth talking about why I think it's so important and critical to hacker history. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Jeff Atwood, Daniel Boyd, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Space Rogue gives his real name in the book, but to me, he has always been, and he always will be, Space Rogue. An intense, straight-talking guy, with arms crossed and telling me like it is, talking to me straight up on whatever he's thinking about, his opinions, and what his hopes and ideals are for whatever projects he's working on. He was part of the gang of Boston area hackers, bulletin board systems, and ultimately groups like The Loft, Messiah Village, and many others, where people hung out, lived together, tooled around and toyed around with all sorts of technology and places, and gave me thousands of individual memories and stories that I'll always treasure. But the through line of what eventually became a nationally known hacking group, The Loft, has never really been told in any sort of forthright manner. People would be very good at giving this name or that, or focusing on something that group did, the fallout when they ultimately disastrously joined up with what became At Stake, and maybe the lives of different members of the Loft after everything was basically over. But Space Rogue, who had been, in my opinion, one of the most shabbily treated of all the Loft members in the At Stake phase of the Loft, had an opportunity, through his unique skills, to tell a story of his life and what put him within the realm of Boston-based hacking, the environment of the Loft, and what led to these folks becoming so worldwide known. The Loft is a handful of folks, technical and engineering-based, who ultimately banded together, had a hacking space, who, while interesting, represented one piece of a very large puzzle. An interacting group of technical people, of which I'm proud to call myself one of them, where, due to bulletin board system access and in-person meetings, friendships, relationships, whole experiences became part of a greater epic event, and, like many social scenes, dissipated with only a few long-time friendships resulting, and people who have kept in touch to varying degrees ever since. I started the Works BBS in 1987, but by 1988 had moved to Boston and took the board down. I eventually helped bring the board back with a sysop called Dave Ferret, who kept the Works running for years, passing it off to others to the point that it lasted many, many times longer than I ever had it. I was there, and I was part of that scene, and it's where a whole group of people coming from all different locations gathered until eventually we decided the gathering could be in person. Meeting at the Café Aventura in Harvard Square, later the Au Bon Pain, it was a regular meeting of the minds and a way to take things offline and make them feel really solid and full of potential. Space Rogue's book starts with his own life that begins in Maine, living with a family that went through divorce, moved him to different places, had him join up with the military, find a series of low-paying jobs, but always find a lifeline in computers and bulletin boards and modems, and showing how even in the most mundane of situations, being in charge of guarding a small room or a desk, he was able to find ways to communicate with others, voraciously take in what people were talking about, and then ultimately join up with what became the Loft. This book goes into great detail about how two women running a hat company decide to give up their space, and their hacker partners take over the space and bring in others to split the costs, leading, ultimately, to calling itself the Loft, as a sarcastic spelling worthy of the best leet speak of the 1980s. L0PHT. In between scavenging hardware, selling and getting rid of equipment as they play with it, this group was a powerhouse of knowledge, of exploration, of figuring things out and then finding gaps and errors and oversights in all sorts of critical technical infrastructure and sharing it with others. Not for the points of making money or exploiting it, but simply to bring the information out there. I think between that spirit and working on various projects like Loft Crack or the Whacked Mac Archives CD-ROM, the Loft gave itself something that a lot of other hacker enclaves did not: a sense of purpose and permanence. Space Rogue's book, which I picked up from him at the Iffy bookstore in Philadelphia, was written so that he could work through his feeling about where he had triumphs, how he got to where he was, what he observed from his point of view through the years covered in the book, and then ultimately find conclusions, looking back where he was mistreated or treated really well, both acknowledging and lambasting. And in doing so, I think he's providing an initial vital framework and template for hacker books to come. Space Rogue bends over backwards in this book to stress that these are his memories, his conclusions, his perspective of what went on and why, and that it would be really nice if more books came to fill out the parts he got wrong or which he didn't know all the details. And I stand with him on that. Most important to me about the Space Rogue book is that it shows the path, both arbitrary and inevitable, going from pulling seedlings in a family greenhouse in Maine all the way up to testifying in front of Congress about the internet. The themes of curiosity and bonding with friends, having the ups and downs of various years, and being there and putting the work in when it was necessary, are, to me, the most vital lessons this book has to teach. It's not a case of some sort of coyote trickster with mirrored shades, moving through things 3 steps ahead of everybody, always surprising you that they've thought about everything. But instead, a meaningful memoir about a person's life and how, arbitrarily, dreams don't come true and then do. Opportunities that seem once in a lifetime fall apart when you think you have them, and how, again and again, Space Rogue picks himself up and focuses on the next things that need to be done. The book is not a book of wins. It's an accurate book of the experience of getting up to play the game every single day. I hope somebody reads this book not expecting to get a how-to on how to live their life, but to understand that there is no one template for living it, no starting gun, no moment that you go past where you can't return, can't make yourself better, can't find a way back to what you were hoping to do when you started. The book, in other words, may be a how-to, but not how to hack. Not how to join a startup or begin doing journalism as a hacker news correspondent, but instead a how to live every day, knowing that nothing is permanent, nothing is owed you, and it's through your perseverance, your wishing to become something better, that leads to some sort of victory, again and again. I highly recommend this book, even if I'm in it a little bit. Paired with Joseph Menn's Cult of the Dead Cow history, we're starting to see a library assembling itself. Not of wins of commercial success and which person invented what in some sort of founder's story, but a travelogue of a very interesting time in late 20th century hacking that I think, at least for myself, represents a joyful noise that I'll always treasure. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, thanks to James Bekoyanu, Mark Pilgrim, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Craig Talbert, Dileep Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Martin, Symbionts, Tiggs, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Sitting in the room of iffy books with dozens of people hanging off of Space Rogue's every word as he did a reading, I was so proud of the fact that my friend has found a toehold in understanding his own life. The fact that his family, his children, and his wife could watch him telling people stories of the life he's lived, stories they've probably heard 100 times, and seeing how fascinated people were. Feels like a gift few people get to receive. I hope other people out there with stories to tell of their own regions, of their own worlds, their own friendships, their own scenes, might consider putting pen to paper or keyboard to blog, or maybe even voice to microphone, and tell us those stories. I think we want to hear them.